So imagine that you have to give a talk or a presentation or a lecture on some technical matter. Maybe you're doing a presentation on using matplotlib in Python or a particular R package, or maybe you're showing how to log into a cluster. And say you need code blocks with syntax highlighting. So you need to show code. It could be Bash code, could be Python code, could be C++ code, but you'd like this to be nicely syntax highlighted so that it's easier to understand. You might want to add some images. You might need to have a column format. You might want to select a nice font. Maybe there's a style you want to follow. Maybe you want one version that you're presenting, like this one here, where things occur or appear in lockstep, and another one for publishing. So the slides of this presentation are actually posted on the course website. If you haven't found it yet, I'll give you a link later. But it doesn't have these transitions because, to be honest, I find this annoying. So there's a handout version for publishing and one for presenting. I tend to give the same presentations, or usually with lectures, more than once. So there's different versions, and I want to keep them on a version control. So then it makes it would be good if that is a format that it lends itself to doing that, and that basically means we want some sort of text format. So for me, after trying different things, I still always go back to slides. So I'm showing slides. But they have to somehow be based on plain text. So that's why I don't create them with PowerPoint or with LibreOffice or something like that, because that makes it hard for me to use version control. Not that it's entirely impossible, but it's hard to see like differences from one to the other. I also have worked with Jupyter notebooks, but I don't find them that great for presentations. They're sort of too messy. You're jumping back and forth you never see all of the slides anymore. It actually makes it a bit messy in my respect. They can be very useful, these notebooks, if you're, say, explaining a Python application and you have that as supplementary material. But as the main presentation source, I still like slides. I also am not too impressed with this sort of two-dimensional browser-based presentations. They can be very nice, but I also want at the end of the day to be able to present or to publish it to a PDF that sort of looks kind of the same. So I don't find them adding too much to the slides, and so I'm not doing reveal.js, although it's a very nice technology as well. No PowerPoint, partly because it's proprietary, so you do need to license, but it's also harder to reproduce. If I want to do the same again, I have to copy things. I can accidentally move things around and have no record of what happened. Don't really like that kind of way. And for a similar reason, no LibreOffice. It's the same idea, but now open source. Nice because you don't need a license, but again, it can be hard to reproduce. And because it's not text-based, you don't get version control. Nice. So I'm going to stick with creating slides, and those slides will be based on some sort of text format, and that then can generate, say, a PDF. And some technologies also can give an HTML. That's nice, but that's not my main point here. So if this was, say, 15 years ago, I say, well, of course, you're going to make slides with LaTeX. Why LaTeX? Because it has a package to do slides. It's called Beamer, and it's been around for a while. Yeah, you can Google lots of techniques for it. You can do overlays. So those are the things where a slide doesn't appear all at once. You can do syntax highlighting to an extent because LaTeX can do it. But if you really want to do it well, you want to say this particular type of object in my code always has this particular color, then you do a lot of manual stuff. You process it with LaTeX. So you have to have that installed, but that's okay. One of the things that is nice about LaTeX is if you're coming from a physics, math, or CS background, there's a good chance that you already know LaTeX. So it seems like a logical choice just because it's a tool you might know. But although when you know what you're doing, the results of that can be really good. It is kind of tedious. It is error prone. So I have stepped away from that. It's especially error prone because LaTeX, when you don't do everything perfect, can throw errors where your PDF will basically not be created. And so rather than having a presentation that is just a little bit off because you made an error, but you could still go ahead and give the presentation, you don't have a presentation. So that is, and so no, as most people do, I do tend to make last minute changes to my slides. Just go, oh, I need to do this or that, or there's a, and then when that breaks your LaTeX um, compilation, say, then you're stuck. Now, if it's version controlled, you will roll back, and that's fine, but it is very annoying. So not really happy with that. Typically, you also have the possibility of doing a lot of tweaking, which you shouldn't, because it gets you into the first problem. If you tweaked it wrong, you have an error. So there's a lot of LaTeX hacking that tends to go on to make sure that you get what you want. A lot of that is done by the Beamer package, so that is true. But you know, one thing that is, and I'm finding this more and more a bit annoying, is that in the same LaTeX source file, you would have to mix your whatever it has to do with how you want things to be presented with what you want to present it. So you mix the style and the content, and you'll always do that to some extent. You're presenting something, you want to have some control over how it looks and how it's presented, and that's normal. But the more you can separate the style from how your slides look from the content, the easier it is. It'll also make it easier to make a new presentation that is in the same style, but just has different content, or to change the style, but keep the content the same. You don't really have that with LaTeX that easily unless you're very disciplined. Uh, Lots of boilerplate is needed for LaTeX. So you've got headers, you've got a preamble, there's lots of packages that you probably have to include. If you want something new, you'll Google it, you say include this package. It will all work as long as you have a nice comprehensive LaTeX installation. So those are all things that even if you know LaTeX are still not fantastic. I mean, they get in the way of your productivity. Let's put it that way. And finally, if you don't know LaTeX, this is not going to be how you're going to go, because it is true. It's a bit of a learning curve. You have to learn to deal with errors that are hard to track down and easy to make. So it's got a learning curve. So if you're not familiar with it, using that to make slides seems like an odd choice, I think. So while this is a valid technology, and I've used it a lot in the past, this is not ideal, and there's something better. And here's an example of about the simplest slide deck I could create with LaTeX. So I made it just about fit on the page here, except the name of the logo stuck out here, sorry. But the result of this, once you PDF LaTeX this, is 2 pages. And one page that has there's a title page and then a first slide. So you can see that the slides don't really start until we're about like 2/3 in. Of course, when you have more slides, the slide part would increase, but that's what I mean. You have quite a bit of, even for the simplest case, boilerplate. And this is using Beamer already, who can set up a theme for you. So there's some predefined themes. This is Cambridge US. And Beamer is something that we will be using under the hood, but we don't want to be so specific about it and all of these details. Anyway, but it works, right? This is you could start like this. You could add slides. You could Google your way around and do something, but it mixes all of the how things should look with what is actually presented. There's a question: can you see the changes updated in real time? It depends. You can set it up that way, but you need some sort of IDE for that. So usually you edit something in your source file and you type PDF LaTeX source file, and it creates it. And if you have a PDF viewer open at the same time, it probably refreshes automatically. At least a decent PDF viewer will do that. So almost, but it's not. Those are like the viewer is separate from generating the PDFs, and that's true for most of these technologies. You can find some, I think, online IDEs that might do that for you, but there's a little bit of setup that you might have to do to work, make it work. Since it's just a single text file, it's not, as long as you have an editor and a viewer and either a terminal open or some way in your uh, editor to start the LaTeX process, yes, you could do that. Okay, so there's a program called Pandoc that will help us here. And what Pandoc can do, Pandoc is not meant for creating slides per se, but we're going to use it for it anyway, because it's one of the things it can do. It's a way more general tool that transforms one format of markup language to another markup language. So now I have to explain what a markup language is. Um, so a markup language is a document format. It's plain text where things look like normal text, but then there's tags that describe how things should be displayed. So some examples are LaTeX. We just saw LaTeX. And if you look at the LaTeX, you see that there's plain text in there, and then there's all these slash begin something that are the tags. HTML is another form of markup language. The syntax is different, but again, you have text, and then there's tags that explain how those tags should be displayed or what they mean, and then the renderer, which in that case would be your browser, will turn that into a presentation, let's say. XML, which is a more general form of HTML, also uses tags to describe what the different text things are. And Markdown is another one. So Markdown is the one that we're going to focus on because it's a very expressive but simple format that will do pretty much what we want it to do without having too much boilerplate. So I already said I don't want to do LaTeX. I could do HTML, but now it has to run in a browser. So I already said that's not what I want. So Markdown is sort of left. It's not that this is an exhaustive list of markup languages, but now Markdown is loosely defined as a sort of a markup language in contrast to the other ones. So there are different versions and flavors of Markdown. I'm going to try and stick to a basic part of it, and then a set of select extensions, some of which that I had to implement myself to make things work the way I want. But it's still Markdown. Now, Markdown is, let's look at Markdown. If you haven't seen Markdown, it looks too simple to be true, too good to be true almost. And how you express very simple things. For instance, if I make a document and I want some headings, and so could be a book, could be an article, could be a presentation. You can have different levels of the heading, so a section, a subsection, sub-subsection. How do you do that? You put a pound sign in front of the top level, a double pound sign in front of the second level, 3 pound signs, etc. And that gives you a heading. There's an alternative syntax for that for level 1 and 2 with other lines, which is kind of more verbose. But what's nice is if you had a text that just had these things in it, plain text, you would see, okay, that's a heading. After a while, you read them as headers. Paragraphs work a little bit like in LaTeX, if you know how that goes. That is, if you have lines that are following one another without an empty line in between, they're just part of the same paragraph. So you can have line breaks in your paragraphs that don't become real line breaks. If you want a real line break, if you really want a new paragraph, you have to do an empty line. So you see there's an empty line here. This is not the source, but that's kind of how it would look. We'd have a line, you would have an empty line, another line. Otherwise, these two parts. Yeah.
Sorry, which slide are you currently on? Because I'm on the LaTeX example.
Oh dear.
So
Let me stop share and reshare. So it's talking about Pandoc. So are we seeing Pandoc now?
Yeah, I can see Pandoc now.
Okay, let's see. I don't know what that's Zoom acting up here. Okay, so we're going to look at Markdown. I explained in words why, and these are the slides. So can you guys see the Markdown Basics 1.3?
Yeah, I can see that now.
Okay, good. All right, so headings work this way. So headings are like sections, subsections, subsections. Just put a pound sign in front of them, and that indicates in the Markdown what level of your heading you're in. Excuse me. And then I said there's alternatives with underlines, so that's what they look like. We'll see in a second how they translate into actually the slides we're generating, but this is the syntax of Markdown. So that says, okay, that's a header. Paragraphs will concatenate lines that are together. So if you don't have an empty line in between two paragraphs, they will be glued together. So they'll be seen as the same paragraph. You can have new lines, so ends of lines and then a line right after it. They all become glued together as one paragraph. So when they are, let's say, typeset, they become one big paragraph. So this paragraph here could have been broken up. As long as there was no empty line, it would still be one paragraph. So there is some meaning to white space in this format, and this is one of them. Okay, so formatting, you can format your text to some extent. You can make a word italic. You put 2 stars between at the ends of the word or a phrase. You can make it bold with a double star on both ends. And you can combine them. So 1 star and 2 star becomes 3 star, then it becomes bold italic. You can have subscripts and superscripts with wiggles and carets, whatever you want to call these. Strike through. And also interesting, and something that's going to be more to the point of this presentation, you can have code. So if you have code, you use these backticks. They don't really render very well here, but they're that the quotation mark you never use in real text, and that is somewhere probably on the top left of your keyboard. That backtick starts a code. So that is set in at this stage just a monospaced for font. So that's what it would look like. Okay, so that's text formatting. So when you can have headers, we can have paragraphs, we can have text formatting. What else can we have? Can you guys see Markdown 2.3?
Yeah.
Excellent. We can have lists. When you want a list, you just start a list with a dash, a space. The space is important for it to realize that it's not just minus a number, and then an item, another item. And when you would generate this into another format, it actually gives it as a list. So there's some dots or whatever style you have chosen. Instead of a dash, you can also use a plus or a star as the marker of your list. You can have numbered lists. Then you have to, instead of having a marker, you say 1 dot, 2 dots, 3 dots. If these are subsequent, it will actually know that what you mean is to continue the numbering. So this is not so much a mistake as saying I don't have to bother with the numbering. The Markdown translator into PDF or HTML or what have you will know that this is actually a list. It is better to make this a tool for yourself, but you know, it's already a numbered list. Code blocks are very interesting too, because that's where we're going. And in standard Markdown, if you start indenting lines by 4 spaces or more, it knows it's code. And so that's going to be generated as code, which means in monospace font. So if you want a code block, you space it with 4 spaces. And then this is going to be funny because so this is the source and this is the result, but the result doesn't have the indentation. You can't see that because I'm not saying, I mean, because it's side by side, but the source has indentation and then the result will not have. To make this not so dependent on indentation, you can have these things called fenced code blocks. They are actually only in Pandoc and other extensions. They're not the the original Markdown, but they're so ubiquitous that those are the ones we're going to be using. So then you can start a block of code with 3 of these backticks. Here they're generated a little bit better. So you start a block with 3 backticks and end it with 3 backticks. And then when it's rendered, it just gives you the code, right? So those ticks are not there. So this is your source. This is what you get. I have chosen to typeset the sources that I'm showing you as code, which is why they look so alike. This is this meta presentation stuff that I was talking about. It's actually quite tricky to explain how to show you how to code using this technology. You can see the meta is very heavy on this one. One more slide about Markdown basics, just to show you what it can do. Are we seeing basics 3.3?
Yes.
Okay. Including images, especially if you're doing presentations, you're going to want images. There's an image right here of the Signet logo. How did it get there? So the syntax is exclamation mark, starts at a sentence, starts at a line, between square brackets, a caption that you might want, and then the file location. So that can be relative to the location of your Markdown file. So this file, this image will live outside of the Markdown file itself. So for example, if I do exclamation mark, a logo, and then my logo.png, which is a file I have in the current directory, it will generate something like this once we're done. So this was the content of it, my logo, and it has made a caption and you called it figure 1. Now, in presentations, I usually don't want that caption. So you can just leave this blank. You still need the square brackets, but you can leave that blank, and then it just doesn't have the figure 1 logo. You can have links. Again, in a presentation, links might not be so important, although if you pick up the PDF and you hover and you click on this, you will see that it actually is a proper link. This is how it was written. So instead of an exclamation mark, you don't have an exclamation mark. That's basically it. The link text comes first, much like the caption, and then the URL of where you want to point to. So for example, if I wanted to do a link that displays as course, but then links to Signet courses /1377, then this is how you would typeset it. This, by the way, is exactly where you will find the PDFs as well. So tip. If you just want to have the URL, so if the link test and the URL are the same, writing them twice seems a bit superfluous, and it is. You can actually use this other syntax where you put the URL in between angular brackets or lesser than, greater than. What else can you do in Markdown? This shows this particular one called block quotes, I think really shows how a lot of this formatting came out of email. Because if you reply to an email in the old times and you included the incoming email, it would be that incoming email, original email would be prepended by a bunch of greater than signs. So it would quote that email with this. You do that again here. So it would generate it, or it would render it differently, I'm sure, depending on your style, but you can have block quotes. And then finally, if you like horizontal rules, so along a line, you can just do 3 dashes on a line and it will generate a horizontal rule. You can kind of see that is more geared towards web interfaces, although horizontal rules aren't as popular as they once were. Anyway, those are sort of the basics of Markdown. So we can have lists, we can have images, we can have links, we can have code. No syntax highlighting yet, but I'll get to that. But it's all fairly simple to type without a lot of extra boilerplate. Now, we want to make slides. So for that, we're going to use Pandoc, which can understand this Markdown. It will generate LaTeX, but then we need to use slides. So we'll have to have that LaTeX use the Beamer technology that I quoted before. So that's just a package in LaTeX. It's going to hide a bunch of this stuff for us, but it is going to do that. So it's going to use Pandoc, it's going to use Beamer. And then if we do that, our level 1 headers that we just had will become sections. So we can have sections in our slides, a nice title in between them. The slides themselves will be the level 2 headers. So whatever header that was becomes the title of that slide. And then level 3 headers and below become what I would call boxes. And you've seen a few boxes already. Here are a bunch of boxes. That's them, those kind of boxes. So here's an example of just using Pandoc with Beamer. So if I have a file here, this is the source, this is the markdown, and that's called pandocbeamer.md. It just contains this. The coloring is just the syntax highlighting that I'm already using, but it's not in the file. The file is plain text. We have to type on the command line, so this is all kind of Linux-based. Pandoc, we have to say what type of output we want. So we want Beamer. We want to say the file name that goes in and the file name that has to be generated. So Pandoc is very versatile. That's where we have to specify this. And I've got a wrapper around that will show in a few slides. When you do that, these are the 2 pages you get. So you get, this is a section that comes from this first slide, and you get, this starts a slide. So this is a separate page. It's hard to see here. So it's very bare bones, but it works, right? And then there's a bunch of things you can do with Pandoc by adding things to this, to a header, to tweak the style. But if we did that, we're mixing the style and the content again. So but that's how you would do it. You'd start like this, and you'd start figuring out how to add style. Because we're using Pandoc, one of the nice features that Pandoc has is it can do automatic syntax highlighting. And this is really why Pandoc was the choice. That's what it does. I don't want to have to go into syntax highlighting, do it manually. And if I decide that I want to change how it's going, edit everything. So if I had my original fence code block, like here, so this is a little bit of bash code, which will just print this is code. If I wanted to highlight that with Pandoc, so that would produce just this very plain looking code. I just have to say what kind of code it is. It's a bash code, so that's the bash language, and I've added that to the triple quotation marks. Now when I put it through Pandoc, depending on the style I chose, but in the style that is appropriate for the slides here, I get this. I get highlighted code. I've chosen a dark background somehow. I'm not getting into how right now, but it has a different color for this comment or the shebang, different code for strings, and a different color for strings and different color for just regular code, I guess. So that's how you do it. There's one more way to do it, which is useful in the future. Instead of bash, you can put curly brackets and then dot bash. The dot is important because otherwise it won't work. Does the same thing here, but with these curly brackets, we'll see we will be able to put options in here, which if you put them behind here, I don't think they work. So that's a way to do it if you're going to have options. So great. We can do syntax highlighting if we didn't care too much about style, if we were fine with a style like this. By the way, are you guys still seeing the transitions?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Then that would be it. There's a lot of languages that Pandoc supports. So Pandoc has a lot of has evolved over time. So if you're installing it yourself, try and get a recent version so that it has all the language you want. Any tweaks or things that didn't work in the past would have been fixed. Don't get a very old version of Pandoc. There have been breaking changes. So long list, 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 columns of about 20 languages. Almost anything that I have to present is in here, including Markdown itself. Where is it? Here it is, Markdown. So if you do pandoc-list highlight languages, it will list all of the ones that it knows. So if you have an older version, there might be a few less, but common ones are C, C++, Bash, Markdown, as I already said. It knows SQL. It knows a whole bunch of things and how to highlight those. Okay, so that's great. But to go on from this and to make something that looks well, looks nice, there's a few things that I was missing. One thing that was missing, and it was missing for a while because I've been using this for a little while, is a nice way to do columns. I don't know if you noticed, but most of my slides use columns. Here are 8 of them, for instance. To do that with Pandoc is a little bit involved. It kind of leans on this idea of having div elements in HTML, if you've done those, but then in a slightly different syntax, and it works, but it I don't like it. It's too verbose. Another thing that I don't particularly like, or that I wish that it could do, is include another source file. So if I have a source file already and I'm going to present it inside a presentation, I don't really want to copy that into the presentation for a couple of reasons. One of the reasons is if I change the source file, now I have to change it into spots. So very counter to how version control should work. I just want to be able to include it. But also, sometimes I have to present code that doesn't fit on one slide. So I want to cut it in different portions. And so it'd be nice to say, okay, just give me a portion of this code or highlight this code and it just comes from a different file. Doesn't do that. Okay, so we're going to fix that. Theming, so choosing what like fonts you have, what logo is in the border here, is a bit tricky. It's all possible, okay, because we're using it here, but it's a little tricky, so it's not easy at all. And then there's some things that is missing. For instance, if I want to center a piece of text, Markdown doesn't have a way to express that, and there's no extension that does that, which I found odd. So sometimes I like it centered. Within Beamer, for instance, if you've done Beamer, there's an alert statement where you can make something have a different color to stand out. So that's not bold, that's not italic, that's not bold italic, that's not code. It's a different color. And they call it alert, and it'd be nice to have that. So I was missing that. So for these reasons, and mostly to make myself a bit more productive when I generate new slides, I created a wrapper around it. I've called it MDS, and most of the things I name get backronymed. So MDS stands for Markdown for Slides. It's been a private project for a while. I mean, we used it in the team, but it's at a spot, but where I might as well share it. So I'm sharing it here. It's in GitHub. It's called MDS. And it's trying to add those conveniences that are missing. It's what I've used for my slides for years. And so now I know it can be productive. But it's really very much a wrapper around Pandoc and then PDF or XE LaTeX, which is a version of LaTeX. They can do Unicode and fonts better. And so all the hard part is still done by Pandoc and PDF. It's just a bash script if you want. And because it's a bash script, it really is only supposed to work on Linux. So it'll probably work on a Mac. On Windows, if you have the Windows subsystem for Linux, it'll work on there. Might even work on MobaXterm. I don't know if it's right. But essentially, it's a bunch of pre and post processing hacks. And so sometimes that might show, if you look at the code, it will very much show, here's a set command, here's a grep command, here's just some, like it is patchwork, admittedly, but it makes my life so much easier. So rather than being completely generic on how it was designed, because it really came about organically, let's just look at what it can do and how I would start writing a slide deck like the ones we have here. So here's my first slide. I have a first level, this is my slide, has some text and some lists. I save this, it's Markdown, so I've called it progress.md, and then I run the MDS script. If it's not in your path, you would say something like /MDS, or if it's in your path, MDS. And so MDS will assume that LaTeX is there. It will assume that Pandoc is there. If it's not, you'll get error messages. So those are prerequisites. and then it will produce a PDF. It only has this one purpose of generating PDFs from Markdown. So it doesn't have to specify that because it already knows that's it. Inside that script, all of the Pandoc stuff is done. And then you get this. It's a slightly nicer default than pure Pandoc. Not by much, but a little bit. So here's my first slide. It has some text and it created the lists. It also generates or leaves behind the LaTeX version of this. So I haven't had to do this for a while, but if there's some tiny tweak you need to do that you know how to do in LaTeX, but it's just, you could go into that text file, make that edit, and push it through PDF LaTeX one more time and get your results if that's what you want. Also very useful for debugging. Obviously, if something goes wrong or it looks very different from what you thought it would be, this might give you some hints. Then you do have to know LaTeX, obviously. Yeah, so it generates LaTeX. Here's the LaTeX. It starts with a document class and some options and some stuff. It looks kind of tiny. Actually, looking at the LaTeX, you say, oh, 9 points. I guess that's the default. How would I know? Well, documentation. Okay, so that's a bit boring. Let's add some style. So the first thing to do is to say that that font was way too small. Nobody can read that. So let's add some style. And in this idea of separating the content from the style goes in a separate file. And it can be called style.theme. And if that exists, then this MDS script will notice it and use it. But of course, if you have several Markdown files in the same directory, you want to have different theme files. So you can also name it by the name of the file, but with MD replaced by theme. And that's probably what you should do. So if you had progress.theme, and in that progress.theme, you set the font size to 13 points. And this really is just Bash language in here. So font size equals 13 points. If you know Bash, you know you can have spaces in between the equal signs. Keep that in mind. And then once that exists and it's in the file, you run MDS progress MD again. And now you get a bigger font. Let's go back forward. This was tiny. This is bigger. Okay, good. What else? Let's add a logo. So logo equals, and then you give it the name of the file or the picture that contains your logo. Lots of formats are supported, but usually PNG or JPEG or something like that will work. And there we go. We have my logo here. It puts it in the bottom right corner. That's the default. Don't change the default unless you have a reason to. And here it is. Okay, so there's some theming going on here. We'll see a couple of other options that we can do later on, or I've got some examples later, but that's the idea. We want the theme to go into the style file. That will somehow be incorporated into the Markdown in a way that Pandoc will know what to do, and it will do its thing, and it will generate a PDF, and now it's beautiful. So some more style. It's good to know that we use Beamer. I'm not hiding this because there's a lot of Beamer themes available. And if you Google Beamer themes, you can find pictures of what they would look like. And so one of the ones we showed before in the LaTeX example was Cambridge.us. So you can set that theme. That's the Beamer theme to Cambridge. Once you do that, you run it through MDS again. It looks a lot nicer, right? It looks exactly as we had in the LaTeX. So now we have the version that is basically equivalent to what the LaTeX version was. But when we want to add things, we don't have to add it the LaTeX. Here's one particular place that I found which listed the Beamer themes by, and you can select them and see how it looks like. There's sub themes within that you can choose, and all those themes that you can find here, you'll be able to select. You can also change your font. So this is your standard sans serif LaTeX font, which isn't too pretty. It's okay. It'll do the job if you need to. But if you have more fonts installed on your machine, you can say what you want. So you can set the font family to something else. Now, it turns out if you do that, PDF LaTeX won't know what to do with it. And so you have to switch from PDF LaTeX to XE LaTeX. But MDS does that for you. So it sees, okay, you have a font, you need a different engine to generate your PDFs, it will do that. And then it looks a little nicer. This is the font that I've used for these slides as well. So if it looks familiar, that's exactly what it is. Okay, we didn't have a title yet. How do we add a title slide? That's important. So here we need to add what's called a YAML header. So it's kind of an extension of Markdown. It's a bit unfortunate, but we keep all these extensions as small as possible. This header starts with 3 dashes and ends with 3 dashes. And then in between, you can say what the title is. You can say who the authors are. If there's more than one, you can make it a list. You can give it a date, and it kind of keep it to that. In Pandoc, you can add a whole bunch more. In MDS, I would suggest you try not to do that because it messes with what MDS is trying to do. Okay, so now we have a slide. Now we have a title slide. Here it is. Looks nice. It still has the logo because we didn't change anything about that. So everything has a logo. The theme is good. Done. Okay, so that's great. What about all those things that I said was wrong with Pandoc, or not wrong, but not present in Pandoc? Columns, for instance. So one of the extensions that I really like because it makes it so easy to make columns is this syntax for columns. So here's a column. In that column, I want a block, but the column starts with 2 square brackets, and the next column starts with 2 parallel lines. And the idea is columns are parallel, so that sort of expresses that the next part is in parallel to the first part. And you can have more than one column. And then the result of this code, when run through Pandoc, gives you 3 columns. So the first column said I have to have column 1 in it and a block in it. The second column said, yeah, also column 1. And the third column was all in this block, if you can see. So it's now it automatically divides it evenly. And there's some ways you can tweak that in future versions, but right now that's sort of the default. But yeah, you can have as many columns if you want as you want. We saw an example of 8 columns without having to do this Pandoc syntax. That's a bit verbose. Centering, I said I want to be able to center a line. Here we go. So the syntax I came up with, and this is just MDS specific. They won't work in other markdowns, unfortunately, is to put an arrow to the left, an arrow to the right, and then it will center the message. Pretty simple. The alert, so giving a different color to a text. I chose 4 stars because 1 star is italic, 2 stars is bold. I can't do 3 stars because that's italic bold, so 4 stars becomes a different color. And you can combine them, so you could have a different color, bold and italic, by having 7 stars. And then finally, and that is just sometimes useful, what if I want an empty line? So empty lines are sort of all squashed together as if there's just one or none. And so here's an empty line with just a period. The period disappears, and it's an empty line. In this case, I had 2 boxes that I kind of wanted to have the same height. I didn't want to have to put in explicit LaTeX. I just put a dot there saying empty line. If I don't put a dot there, if it's just a space, it's Markdown forgets that was a line. It just says, okay, that's the end of your paragraph, but you don't get that. So a little bit of tweaking. One that I definitely want to but I really, really like is this idea of having source inclusion. So I said that doesn't exist. Part of the MDS script is to take, whenever it says include a file, to include that file into a temporary markdown and before it gives it to Pandoc. So this is all pre-processing. So the syntax is 3 triple slashes, a triple back tick. Your language again with the dots, and then include equals. And if you want a subportion, you can add extra options like start line and end line. So an example might be easier. So if I want to include the actual source code that generated these files, which is called Coco MDS, Compute Ontario Colloquium about MDS, but I want to start at line 1, numbering starts at 1 here, and end at line 5, this does exactly what you want. And it has this YAML header that I was talking about, and that would be in the first 5 lines. So you can have code separate from your presentation, but present that code in your presentation. When you have version control, that code could have its own version. When it changes, that's fine, but the presentation doesn't change, etc. Oh, and when it's included, it also has the syntax highlighting that you want. Incremental reveal is actually something that Pandoc can do. Another word of that is overlay. So you have one slide that only reveals parts at a time. That's called a pause in some contexts. If you have dot, space, dot on a single line, that says pause there. So this slide is a good example. There's lots of dots. It actually looks more like this. So AKA overlays, then there's a dot with spaces in between. To make it less likely that you have that as a text, and then more dot. So that works, but it reveals things in the order that it happens in your source file. If something has to happen in a different order, you can actually say, well, in the second reveal, also show something else. There's a way to be more specific about your overlays, and that's this add syntax. So this basically says only show this in the overlays that are of this number. And it doesn't have to be number. It can be number up to another number or from one number to the end. This doesn't, I don't like this too much, but sometimes it's what you need where things aren't in the order as they are expressed in the markdown file. Okay, so that's great. We can have our code, we have our basic theming, we have some extra utilities. That makes it easy for me to present code. Lots of code, no issue, just import it. I don't have to copy it. I don't have to do manual highlighting. That's good. There's other options just in this .theme file, so style.theme or whatever the name was, .theme. These are all the options right now that are supported. A highlight, you can choose what your highlight style is. There's only a couple, and you might not like them too much, but I find if you just accept them, just pick the one that you like best. That saves you so much time than trying to tweak it to your personal liking. It's possible, but why? Aspect ratio, most of my slides are now 16:9, but you can choose different aspect ratios, and for some reason there's no colon in there. Logo, we saw a path of the file. You can say how high the logo must be. So you might want this to be, you might think that this was too big. In fact, this is too big because it overlaps with stuff. You can change that. You can choose not to have the logo on the title page. And sometimes that doesn't make sense. The family we saw, the size of the font we saw, the theme we saw. These are other parts of the Beamer fonts that you can look up what they mean, but you can set them to anything that's valid for Beamer. Oh, this one's nice, handout. If you want to produce a version where there are no transitions, so all the overlays are just on top of another, you say handout equals true in your .theme, you run it again, you get a version that is just a handout version. That engine is whether you want PDF or XE LaTeX, which is a more of an implementation issue. I don't even like that it's in the options. And then finally, if you really want to get back into the LaTeX, if you want to add things to extra packages or that you might need, there is a way to include another file if you specify it with theme tag. But I'm not going to go into that because we're at hour, and I kind of expected not to be able to go there. We saw fonts. If you want, the fonts have to be installed. That's all I'll say about this one. If they're not installed, you don't have them. So that's not that they don't come with MDS. If they so figure out how to install them. But if you want to know what's installed on your Linux machine, fc-list:family will show you what's installed. If it doesn't say anything, figure out how to install TrueType fonts for your machine. Talked about this one. Good. Conclusions. So slowly but surely, I've shown you that what I'm using is this MDS script. It allows me to quickly develop slides, separate the style and the theme. So if I want to do a different theme, I just mess around with the .theme file, and that's it. So it makes a lot of things simpler that I have to use a lot, like centering, like using columns multiple columns, and including source files that just become cumbersome if I just use Pandoc. And it's still tweakable. So if I want to do something a little bit more fancy, like change the colors, I can go into the .style tag file. Or if you're really desperate, you can still inline LaTeX into your Markdown. But that really destroys the idea that your themes are separate from your content. But it's possible. There's a few things that I haven't touched upon here. One is theming a little bit more beyond what Beamer gives you. And so I'm working on that. Internally, we already have some of that, but I'm working on making that a little bit generic. So keep an eye on the GitHub repo if you want. And there's other markdown-based approaches that can actually generate the output of your code. So if you have like Python or R, you want to run it. That looks like R Markdown. If you've heard of Quarto, it does that too. That's something I've not touched about here, and I have opinions and points to make, but that's not for today. So with that, thank you for your attention. I'll take a few questions if there are any, and or suggestions. But yeah.